Hello guys, Chunsun here. Today, I'll be reading some more r/entitled parents. I will admit, even though some of these stories seem sketchy, it's still entertaining to read. Enjoy. Entitled mom thinks it's okay to have entitled kid do what he wants, and for her to physically hit employees. As I mentioned in previous post, I used to be a supervisor for public parks in charge of lifeguard staff and pool maintenance. Well, technically not true since I was assigned back to the aquatic division. I am going back home in late June. Happy days. In 2006, I got a phone call to urgently go to one of my facilities. My manager knew that if they want me to show up, they just had to ask and I would go to them within 1 hour, unless I was on an emergency call. So when I was asked to come to the pool fast, it's urgent, I was a bit panicked and might not have respected all the stop signs and speed limit. Let's just say that a drive that usually a bit more than 30 minutes took me about 25. When I got to the facility, 2 police vehicles were parked, not on the street, but right next to the pool's entrance. I could see an irritated lady, entitled mom, in the back seat of one of the cars. I learned later that she was in handcuffs. This is what I was told happened by witnesses and by my staff. Entitled mom had arrived to the pool shortly after the opening, and entitled kid had brought with him a huge inflatable whale to play with. Usually, my staff didn't mind toys in the pool during free swim periods, but when the toys were deemed dangerous or hazardous to the safety of other swimmers, they weren't allowed. Entitled kid was in the water with his toy, and since it blocked the view of the lifeguarding staff, it wasn't allowed. But every time the lifeguards on duty would switch every 15 minutes, entitled kid would run, grab his whale, and jump back in the water with it. Entitled mom would complain every single time that my staff wanted to prevent entitled kid from having any fun. After the whole staff had been through explaining why the toy wasn't allowed, my pool manager intervened and confiscated it, and informed entitled kid and entitled mom that it won't be given back to them when they left the facility. Entitled mom and entitled kid pretended to leave, grabbed the toy, and went back in the water, almost drowning a little girl that got stuck under it. The angry father popped the toy and wasn't usable anymore, and a huge shouting match started between them. Entitled mom and entitled kid were asked to leave, but promised they would behave, and my manager caved, let them stay. After that incident, entitled mom spent most of her time on her phone, paying next to no attention to entitled kid who was still running around, pushing other kids in the water, and basically being a little brat not listening to the staff. Entitled mom and entitled kid were asked to leave again, but entitled mom came back to the office and asked to use the phone. My facility manager informed entitled mom that the phone in the office was reserved for emergency, but that if she needed a charger, he had a few in the lost and founds that he could lend entitled mom, or that there was a payphone in the entrance, a rare sight, but it was still working. Entitled mom yelled at my manager for a couple of minutes, called someone on her cell phone, and started pacing around in front of the office. A rescue took place, so my manager went to help out with the lifeguards, and entitled mom just stepped in the office and grabbed her phone, landline, and started to dial. One of my younger lifeguards, 17 years old, called LG from now on, was put in charge of the office, interrupted entitled mom, and gave the same info my manager has given entitled mom a couple minutes prior. Entitled mom pushed his lifeguard away, raised her hand threatening to slap lifeguard, and started to dial again. Lifeguard didn't take the threat seriously and hung up the phone, pressed the lever, when entitled mom was trying to dial again, saying that the phone was reserved for emergencies. Entitled mom apparently yelled bitch and punch, not slap, punch, lifeguard. Entitled mom tried to run away but was prevented from leaving by witnesses. No one from my staff, luckily. That's when the police and I were called. Entitled mom apparently called her lawyer on the spot while waiting for the police. When I got to the pool, entitled kid was in tears, but being consoled by his father who had just arrived. The father was very apologetic for lifeguard getting punched by entitled mom, but was angry we wouldn't allow the toy in the water or allow it to be destroyed by another user. The father was also not believing my staff when told about his kid's behavior. Lifeguard pressed charges. Entitled mom got a restraining order, but since she lived almost next to the pool, I had to switch lifeguard to another facility to respect the restraining order. I think entitled mom got a fine and community service to go with that restraining order. People on vacation tend to forget how to be civil and believe they are the center of the universe, but entitled mom was one of the worst I have ever seen in one of my facilities. I wish I could have been there before the incident. Lifeguard was my godson's girlfriend. Basically, lifeguard was family. I wish I could have protected my family better. Entitled stepmother wears white to a wedding to get revenge on my dying grandmother. Now, my stepmother and I have a long-running history going on 14 years now. She came into my life when I was very young, and she's been tormenting it since. I have tons and tons of stories about her, but this one will give a brief history of her antics. The backstory is a chunk of it, but very important to the event in the title. My stepmother is not liked by my father's side of the family for many reasons. 1. She didn't treat my sister, father, or I very well. And 2. She drove my father into debt with her high shopping sprees. My stepmother also has 2 children. A daughter who is a little over 11 years older than me, I'm 20, and a son who is 3 years younger than me. My grandmother lived across the street from where my sister and I grew up. She helped my dad out a lot after my mom left, and she watched over us too, like hawks. I think she had the intuition about my stepmother because she didn't like her very much from the start. It came down to a boil one day about a month before her and my dad got married. My grandfather had just passed away, and one of my older cousins was outside doing yard work for my grandmother. My grandfather had a little playground put in for my sister and I, but we had gone to see our mother for the weekend, so my stepmother took my stepbrother over there. It was all nice and dandy until my stepbrother started taunting my cousin, saying, "Your grandpa died, your grandpa died." We had just been to the funeral the week beforehand, so the wound was still pretty open for all of us. My cousin told my stepmother to tell him to stop, but she just kind of stuck up her nose and said that he was fine and he was just being a kid. Side note, my stepbrother is now 18 and super entitled. My cousin was very upset, so he went up to the house and told my grandmother. My grandmother was a tough woman when it came to my stepmother and defending her grandchildren. She marched down the playground and asked my stepmother to leave as if she wasn't welcome on her property, if she was going to allow her son to speak in that matter that he was. My stepmother retaliated and called my grandmother a bitch. My grandmother swore back at her, and it led up to my stepmother following her up the driveway and my grandmother throwing a doormat at her. There was always tension around the holidays after that, and my grandmother's hate for my stepmother grew throughout the years as she learned about how we were being verbally abused. She suggested my father many times that he needed to get a divorce for the sake of my sister and I, but he didn't. My grandmother became sick about 4 years after they got married. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and while she did go into remission, it did come back. My cousin was living with my grandmother when she was diagnosed, and they had a very close bond with one another. My cousin got engaged a little over a year and a half before my grandmother passed. They found out that her cancer had returned not long before his wedding, and she was super sickly, so we knew that this may have been the last big family event that we were going to have together. And it was sadly. My cousin and his wife chose my sister and I for flower girls. So we were a part of the wedding, and due to that, we didn't arrive with our parents. We didn't see much of them at all before the wedding because we had to get our hair done along with the rest of the party. At the church, my sister and I were standing outside the chapel talking with my cousin when I saw him make a face. My stepmother, father, and stepbrother had just walked in the door, and my stepmother was wearing white. Now, my cousin's wife had been part of the family for long enough to know about my stepmother's antics. And if it wasn't for the fact that she was getting ready for her wedding, she would have thrown my stepmother out then and there. My cousin didn't want to cause any trouble on the big day though, so he let it slide. But I know my dad caught the look that he gave him. The wedding goes fine, and before the reception, we were all taking photos. Everyone knew at this point of my stepmother's attire as she was standing at the door of the chapel smirking during photos that she attempted to butt into, but wasn't considered a part of the immediate family or wedding party. And if the looks that everyone was giving her could kill, she'd have been dead. My grandmother had dressed her best the day despite her illness and hung onto my cousin's arm during their photo before I heard her mumble, "I'll be damned if she wear white to another wedding with that grin on her face." Again, my grandmother was tough. This is anticlimactic, but no fights broke out. No one yelled at anyone. The only thing that did happen is that my cousin had a long talk with my father about his wife, about how this was a family event, and she knew that what she wore was extremely frowned upon. She did try to butt into every conversation during the reception, and her son acted like a total dickhead the whole time, but that was expected. Her actions though spoke loudly about her character, as we all knew that my grandmother wasn't doing well. My sister and I were still super young, so we knew that she wasn't going to be seeing her other 2 grandchild get married. She knew that this was going to be one of the last few times the family got together in celebration of something, and my stepmother had to step all over it and draw attention to herself. My grandmother passed away that November. The wedding was in June. When my grandmother went to hospice, my stepmother booed and hooed like she actually cried. But she kept talking about her own mother's battle with cancer, trying to compare the two as if they had some sort of resemblance. But the illness was the only thing comparable. My stepmother thought she had something left for her in the will, but she was definitely wrong about that. She didn't act up at the funeral, but she did during Christmas. which was one of the toughest holidays for all the family as we spent it at my grandmother's house. And it was the first time she wasn't there to be with us. My grandmother had picked out specific things relating to her for the 4 grandchildren, and my cousin's wives when she went into hospice. My stepbrother didn't get anything from my grandmother that year, and my stepmother threw a fit, storming out of the house and going home even though the gifts we were given were sentimental to the connection we had with our grandmother. It's been 8 years, and she still won't get over the fact that my grandmother didn't give him a gift that Christmas, or maybe it's because she didn't get anything in the will, though she had in the past. She still hangs it over our faces sometimes. Her own father is a very old man now, but ever since my grandmother's passing, she told my sister and I, "Your grandmother didn't give me, stepbrother and stepsister anything when she died, so my dad won't give you and sister anything. It's only fair." I can't fucking stand her. My grandmother must be rolling around in her grave if she's seen half the shit my stepmother had done since then. Anyway guys, that will be all from me for today. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't. I'll be back tomorrow with more reads. See ya!